Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. A commentator posted a comment about how I began the year talking about Spohr and ended it talking about Reger, two of the worst composers ever. He said, I thought that was just interesting. Well, I don't even remember talking about Spohr. I mean, I know I did, but, when, the date, I have no idea. But it's not really the point. I think the issue is, are they both the worst composers ever? And I think there's a distinction to be made, and it's an interesting one. Spohr, to my mind, is unquestionably a bad composer, whereas Reger is not. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to think about the reasons why that may be true, the dichotomy between the two of them. And Spohr, he's such an interesting case because he was such a popular composer and he was such a good guy. He really was. I mean, Reger was, kind of snippy. But Spohr, everybody thought was just a wonderful person and generous and giving and full of noble ideals and lofty thoughts. He just was a lousy composer. Well, lousy, let's define our term, shall we? Because, we're just going to generalize and all the Spohrniks are going to have a nervous breakdown. Spohr was a failed composer. I mean, when I say bad composer, does that mean he wrote no good music? No, it does not mean that. It really doesn't. He wrote some beautiful chamber music. His four clarinet concerti are terrific. I mean, those are sort of seminal works in their genre, although he wrote them kind of by accident. And in the chamber field, I mean, he wrote lovely pieces to play with his wife, who was a harpist. His duets for violin and harp and whatnot. They're really kind of path-breaking and lovely pieces. No, the problem with Spohr is that his reach exceeded his grasp. His ideals were always much, much greater than his musical abilities. And that was really the problem. And he kind of knew it. It's very funny. If you read his biography, which is very interesting, where he talks about, for example, his string quartets were impenetrable for most people to listen to. They were just overwritten. He was trying so hard all the time. And that was kind of a mistake, as it turns out. And, you can tell if you look at his symphonies. I have a pack of them here. There are two really good modern Spohr symphony cycles, one on Hyperion and one on CPO. This is the one on Hyperion with Howard Shelley and the Orchestra della Svizzera Italiana. Yes, absolutely lovely. They're both equally good. But the point is this. If you look at his symphonies that have programs, you could see him trying to elevate what he considered to be the yucky, miserable, low-level concept of musical, literature of his day. So let's just look at this. Here we go. We've got some symphonies. There are 10 of them, believe it or not. Number 7, the earthly and the divine in human life. Yeah, right. Which he tries to illustrate by using two separate orchestras. Musically, an interesting concept. Has nothing whatsoever to do with the program, and there's no way in listening to this rather, flaccid piece of music that you would ever know that it has a program, let alone that it's the earthly and the divine in human life. Goodness gracious. And then we've got the 4th Symphony. That was one of his most popular, possibly his most popular in his lifetime, The Consecration of Tone. Now, that's an abstract program. I mean, note that it's elevated, right? It's a consecration. It's a religious event. It's supposed to have a certain solemnity about it, right? But the problem is that Spohr's sort of slithery chromatic style, he was a chromatic sludgenik, just like Reger was, but his chromatic sludge is weak beer compared to Reger's chromatic sludge, because Reger was post-Wagnerian much later. Spohr was much earlier, and his chromaticism was just sort of Mozart's carried to a higher level. So anyway, a higher level, a more excessive level, let's put it that way. The consecration of tone, what the hell does that mean? It's a symphony about a symphony about sound, but a solemn rite, a ritual. His music never gets to that point. It's not a Bühnen Weiss Festspiel a la Parsifal. He just didn't have that kind of. He was much too much a sort of middle classnik bourgeois type. That's what his goal was. His goal was to establish respectability for the profession of musician, and he did that. I mean, he did a lot of wonderful things, like I said, for wonderful people. But does the music express those things? I mean, he wrote operas about Faust, his oratorio, the Die letzte Dinge, the Last Judgment, that sort of stuff. It's all up here in terms of intention and down here in terms of execution. And the gap is obvious. It really is, in my opinion, anyway. That's how I feel. Then there's, of course, that fabulous Sixth Symphony, the Historical Symphony. Oh, my God, what a mess. The Historical Symphony is designed to demonstrate the superiority of prior eras in music to the current era. Terrible idea. Gosh, what a bad idea. But it starts with, with Handel, Bach period, then the Haydn and Mozart period, then the Beethoven period, and then today, which is supposed to sound like bad Italian opera, which it doesn't. It just sounds like bad Spohr, because he had no sense of humor whatsoever. The earnestness with which he executes that final movement parody is just so depressing. It really is. And that's why Spohr is a failed composer. And his music doesn't have to have a program for you to be able to detect the gap between what it intends to do and what it actually accomplishes. Because Spohr's own style, the Spohr style, was like I said, it was a sort of limp-wristed, late chromatic, post-Mozartian droopiness. For the most part, not always. I mean, you have to be careful how you generalize. But we do generalize about number one. And number two, we judge somebody's career not by the nice things that they occasionally did well, but by the big things that they screwed up. And so you've got a passel of symphonies, for example, that aim for the highest level of symphonitude, and which don't get there. And why don't they get there? Well, Spohr, for example, played lots of Beethoven, but he hated Beethoven's music. He did it out of German patriotic duty, but he found that Beethoven was lacking in taste and elevated thought, and all of those things that we value in Beethoven, actually, Spohr disliked. The rambunctiousness, the noisiness, that constant struggle and churning and excitement. He thought all of that was just vulgar and working class. And so Spohr avoided those things. And in avoiding those things, he sucked all the juice out of his music, especially out of his symphonies. And that's what he's judged for today. So he was definitely a failed composer in some respects. So that's that. That's Spohr. Now let's look at Reger. Reger was a different case, because if you look at what Reger wrote, if you look at his compositions, first of all, there are no symphonies. None whatsoever. He never wrote a symphony, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Of course, by the time Reger got to writing around the turn of the 20th century, German composers had finally gotten smart and decided that symphonies were best left to Brahms and Beethoven, because if you were German and you wrote a symphony, you were just asking for trouble. I mean, that was, and Reger got that. But Reger's style wasn't symphonic, and he knew it. You see, you may not like Reger's, chromatic sludge approach to composition and his constant note spinning and all of these things, but he knew what he was. He knew what he could do. His pieces are mostly abstract music in classical forms, Baroque forms, preludes and fugues for organ, theme variation and fugue, contrapuntal forms. That's what he did. Now, did he do it well? Not always. Did he do it well some of the time? Absolutely. I mean, his organ music is very highly respected among organists. And since most people never bother with organ music, we can just take it for granted and leave it at that. Nobody even bothers to judge because they don't bother to listen to it. clever on Reger's part. But in the orchestral works and the piano pieces and some of these big theme and variation sets, that's what he's known for. And whether you like the piece or not, I mean, isn't really relevant. You know, the Telemann variations, the Hiller variations, the Beethoven variations, the Mozart variations, those are the four biggies, those four big pieces for orchestra and for piano solo. And it doesn't matter whether you like them or not. They are unquestionably what they claim to be. They are themes and variations, usually with fugues at the end of them. And that it's not a question. It's not a question. It's not like a symphony about the earthly and the divine and human life, where you could say, oh, for heaven's sake, that's ridiculous. You know, Reger, also being a late romantic, did some romantic things. He did the 4 Buckland tone poems. But interestingly, when he did the Buckland tone poems, it's a suite of 4 very modestly proportioned pieces. I mean, he did it right. I mean, he really did. He got it. They don't outstay their welcome for a moment. He did write that symphonic prelude to a tragedy, which is as long as death and transfiguration, it's only the death. There's no transfiguration. It's like 27 minutes of droopy darkness. So he had his moments of romantic excess. That might not have been his most popular, his most successful work. The symphonic prologue to a tragedy or whatever. It's like, oh, good grief. But the fact of the matter is, he also wrote some lovely, beautiful orchestral works that are all in abstract forms that don't make any attempt to go further than what they are. And so you may dislike it, but you can't really say it isn't what it purports to be, as you can with Spohr. That's the difference, you see. You know, the difference is making sure that when you write a piece of music that it does what it says it does, and there's no question that it is what it is, and people may dislike it, but you can't dispute what it is. See? Get it? That's why Spohr is a failed composer, and a failed composer is in some ways a bad composer, and Reger is not. Right? Get it? I hope this furnished a little food for thought. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.